welcome. I think this is our 4th review, and we're reviewing 3 stances in each review series, so that means we've done 12 stances. Of course, the foundational stance for everything is our horse stance. I think you'll find that to be the case in just about every system. So I'm already in my horse stance. So feet parallel, knees bent, tailbone sinking, spine upright, shoulders relaxed, head suspended, eyes to the horizon, breathing in the nose, breathing out the mouth. That's just some of the things I like to check in on when I do it. But as long as we have our feet about shoulder width, hip width, somewhere in that ballpark in terms of their distance from one another. That's a bit wider than shoulder. This is a bit narrower than shoulder and hip. So somewhere in here, feet parallel. I like to have the weight even between the front and the back, so kind of evenly distributed through the feet. I'm not cheating to the heels or to the toes. I'm also not collapsing the knees in or driving the weight to the outsides of the feet. So knees are bent. I'm in it. I'm gonna just share this with a few people, make a couple notes while I'm already practicing. So here's our link. Glad you're here. Make my note while I do this. You may want to share this or subscribe or something along those lines. Or they say like, comment, subscribe. But I think sharing it with somebody that could benefit is pretty good take. I want to give you guys the weather update. Just seems like an occasional breeze, but it picks up. Maybe 15 is my guess. But it's been still and then kind of intermittently breezy. So that's plenty cold. Yeah, it says it's 32, so you know, freezing here. It says it feels like 25. So I guess that's kind of what I said, just a little breezy. We had a little bit of snow overnight, but it wasn't all that much. I'm going to share it with a couple of the groups we've been sharing it with. I'm going to share it with far fewer people. But as I'm settled in, I'm just trying to monitor myself. There goes Kelly, she takes care of the horse barn. I'm just trying to monitor myself. Have I started to shift to the heels? Have I started to collapse the knees in? Have I started to tighten up the shoulders? Have I started to lean back or look down? Have I forgotten my breathing? So just continually checking in on those things, or at least intermittently checking in on those things, can be really helpful. Particularly if you have a tendency, let's say, to straighten your knees. We can bet, generally, after a bit of practice, those knees are going to start to straighten. If you have a tendency to lift the shoulders, we can bet that after a little while in a practice, those shoulders are going to tend up. If you have a tendency to lean back, that tendency is a good signal to you that, okay, when I correct for it, I probably would do a good job to check back again and see if that same thing is occurring. And then we can apply corrective measures. Very hard to apply corrective measures without corrective attention that's looking for correctives. Ultimately, of course, we'd like to notice, before we start to come out of our structure, our shape, our energy, our stance. And then ultimately, beyond that, we'd really like to know, why. Why is the tendency for me to lift my shoulders? Why is the tendency for her to straighten the knees? Why is his tendency to shift to one side? Why is her tendency to lean forward or forget the breath? Right. So there's a lot of practice going on right now. It certainly doesn't look like much. It looks like your guy just waiting to get hitchhike pickup. Anyway, I'll keep sharing this. Obviously, if you have a question or comment, feel free to leave it. I'm just going to share this with a couple folks. But but I think not too many. I think a lot of folks that I've shared it with haven't bothered to come on, so I don't want to be bothering them. Hey Sensei Talman, good to see you. That's been a long time. Hope you're well. I hope you approve of my beard. I see Futong. Thank you very much. Thank you for your reaching out personally. I really appreciate that. It's always nice to have you check in. So yesterday we were doing some single weighted horse stance warm up. So I'm going to do that again, and I think I'll just keep the same stance. I think we might have done it in a training horse stance, but at any rate, I've settled down. I'm going to just shift to one side, and I want to make sure that when I shift to one side, I don't lean. I want to make sure I don't kick my hip up. I want to make sure that my knee doesn't track to the outside. I'll show you what that would look like without my weight. If my knee goes out here with my weight on it, that's a real problem. I don't like this now, but it's not particularly dangerous with my weight here. But check for that as you shift. So I've just shifted to single weighted horse stance. Very often in a given stance, the question is, so where is my weight in this stance? And generally there's kind of an aesthetic answer or a default answer or a preference or a place for the weight in a given stance to offer the most defensiveness or the most power expression. But quite often in a stance, your weight can move in the stance. Maybe not fully to one leg and then fully to the other with this massive spectrum, but very often the weight can move in the stance. So it goes from favoring one leg to just favoring the other, or in this case, fully favoring, this is a full spectrum shift, right? I'm 100% on one leg, and might as well, while I'm talking about it, shift over. And you can check with yourself when you're shifting weight, do you have an up and then a down, or are you really staying in the stance at the level that you've established? And that's a really nice thing to check in on, particularly if you have, reached the intermediate level, often we'll kind of unconsciously shy away from the challenge of staying at our level when we shift. So people will shift into this stance and then shift into this stance and then shift into this stance, as opposed to horse to here to cat to gong bu or what have you, and keeping a level. So anyway, I'm just in my horse stance, single weighted horse stance. So I find that quite often teachers don't offer a comprehensive answer to the question, where does the weight go in this stance? They just kind of provide the aesthetic answer, or, well, when we take a picture of it to publish in the book, the weight is here. Or when somebody's doing their form, there's this like pause, and then like the little glint in the eye and the smile, and the photos get taken, and their silks are flowing, for example, right? Or the uniform snaps, and okay, that's where the weight is there. But you're still in the stance, and the weight might shift, particularly through applications. So I was shifting again. I'm going to check my notes because I kind of pre-wrote a few notes today. And I don't recommend doing a stance like this when it's, freezing and you're out of reach of your coffee, and it's just there. That's not recommended. You could tell I'm a beginner. That's our studio behind us. We're all dug out, so hopefully we'll get to doing our Wednesday night classes. Good. So I said I was going to check. Hey, Will. How are you, man? Good to see you, Bill. Steven's here. Hi, Gwen. Hey, Bob. Glad you guys are all here. I'm going to transition here in a moment to another version, so I just wanted to check my notes. So we did the single weighted horse stance coordinating with the breath cycle, so let's do that. And I'm going to just widen my stance a little bit because I've been there for a while. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. So I'm just doing that breath cycle when I get there. You could certainly do a number of breath cycles. We could do this ratcheting down or up as we discussed. But I'm primarily interested in coordinating my weight shift with an exhalation. Exhale. And since an inhalation follows, I'll just be here static. I could shift already, but I'd like to do a little bit more, so I'll exhale again while I'm here. Inhale, and then either repeat that while I'm here or shift. Exhale. Remember, we haven't done any shifting practices. We haven't taught them. There's a whole lot to go over with the idea of shifting, just as with pivoting. So our emphasis here is really in being in the stance, and in this particular variation, coordinating with the breath. So I think today the practice is training horse stance, cross stance, and forward stance. Myself a pair of gloves. I thought I might need them, but so far it feels okay, so maybe not a necessary thing. So we're gonna try I'm wondering what the order was. I feel like we did cross stance first, so I think that's the order that we'll review them in. All right, so let's go into cross stance. So the way we were teaching it is to think in terms of your feet being perpendicular to one another, in terms of the path that they're on from heel to toe. And so my left foot is pointing west. And that's going to bear my weight, and I'm going to step my right foot across. So I'm stepping in the direction that my left foot is pointing, but my right foot, of course, I'm going to feel relatively unstable here if I simply step where it's pointing, kind of that slack line feeling. But if I turn this foot by opening the hip to be perpendicular, or in this case, north, then I have a nice, stable position, right? So the relationship of those 2 feet can be like an L, and they can be like a T, which I think showing you my hands is going to be a little bit easier to understand that. So they can relate this way or this way. And the front foot can be perpendicular, and it can be a little bit less than perpendicular. So instead of 90 degrees, I'm going to have them about 135 degrees, and that can be fine as well. So rather than my foot being like this, it's kind of like this, right? So that would be fine, and of course it could also be this way. So there's, certain styles will tell you it's only done this way, and here's what we prefer. But I'd call them all a cross stance. And of course, in a given style, you might have a different name. I don't even call this a cross stance in my style, but I thought with most of these stances, or all of them, I've been trying to give a name that's kind of anodyne and umbrella, so it reaches everybody fairly well. So I've been trying to avoid being overly specific, you know. So at any rate, once I have my feet there, then I'm gonna shift. You probably noticed I was a little unstable there chatting because I hadn't finished coming into the stance. So the idea is to commit the weight to that front leg, track that knee properly, and settle in. Generally, this is done with the rear heel up so that the ball of the foot's on the ground or the toes. So it's essentially an empty foot stance, but I'll give you a little profile. But quite often, people won't really be empty. They'll be maybe 80% on the front or something like that. It's not really empty like a cat stance, but it can be. So that's fine too. Good again. Since it's a true beginner's practice, I'm trying to not invite the ego to the party and go down as low as I want, but I do want to recognize that as I go lower, I will tend to increase my stability, but also increase the energy output in my legs. In other words, I'll be getting tired faster, sooner. And so very often in this stance, people will, I don't recommend practicing on the ice, by the way. So very often in this stance, people will start something like this, and then over time, they'll kind of find themselves here during a given practice session. And, you know, as they get tired, they look for less output of their work, but then they come into less stability while they're tired. And so I generally recommend in a stance, if you're getting tired, not close to injury, but just tired, try coming into it a little deeper. And yes, you're going to be tired, but that's fine. It's exercise, right? And if I can slowly over the course of my training develop the sense that I'm not afraid of a stance, I can rest in that stance when I'm trying to defend my life. The idea of going into the stance has no hesitation for me. And I can get into that stance and benefit from the stance. So we talked about how much twist we can do in this. Generally, people will find if they have more twist, so my left foot is turned to the left, so that twist would be towards my left with my trunk. The more twist we do, the easier it is to have that heel want to come up, so that can help people. You won't see people keep the heel up too often if they're forward. They'll tend to set it down if their, you know, stance is not too big, and you know, I can't reach my heel down now. So there's our cross stance. We'll probably, I think I'll just stay in this for a little bit, because we didn't do any walking or transitioning with this. Yeah, thank you, Nancy. You're right. As I've said, I don't recommend teaching it this way. I don't recommend doing it this way. I'd rather have you be warm, level surface, good purchase, a supportive surface. That's not what I happen to have on offer to you. Certainly, the idea behind this is to invite people to come into the practices and not feel like they have to learn all of this and shift their focus on these techniques that we're working on today, right? And then we lose our sight of the stance. So I'm sort of purposely trying to put the hands in the pockets, leave the hands down, not do anything with the hands, so that our focus is as purely as we can manage on the stance, on the feet, on the legs. Very often in the martial arts, we give cursory attention to the stances, and then we get excited about what the arms are doing, the upper body's doing, who I'm looking at, what the application is. And being very arm-centric, hand-centric beings, we're encouraged to do that and then go from a cursory attention to the stance to sort of a neglectful relationship with the stance. And then that stance is not there to support us, and in fact that stance might be bringing us harm or injury. So that's kind of the idea with this. Like, I'm trying not to do anything with the hands. My training, you know, for a stance like this would be something like this, and I'd be holding a position for specific reasons, or I'd be going through a sequence while I maintain the stance. So anyway, there's our cross stance. I guess I'll thank you for the input, Nancy. You're absolutely right. So we're gonna do a little training horse stance as well. Welcome aboard, Nancy. Hi, Robert. Hi, Robert. Hello, everybody. Glad you're here. So training horse stance, I think I didn't mention that it can be done with feet parallel. I don't remember if I mentioned that, if I taught that variation, but I know that I did it with the feet open, so I think I'll just do it that way today, so that I'm not reviewing something that I didn't talk about. But it certainly can be practiced parallel. It's more challenging for people in their knees. So the training horse stance is a bit wider, and that allows us to go a bit lower. But again, it's all relative, right? If your regular horse stance is here, your training horse stance might be here. But our horse stance has been here. You know, I just really gone 2 inches lower. So my training horse stance is just gonna go beyond 2 inches. So maybe 4, I don't know. I'm not measuring, of course, I'm guessing. Making sure that my knees don't collapse inward. If they do, revise your footwork, revise your depth, revise your pace of going into it, and perhaps minimize the number of things you're trying to do so you can focus on the most important things. Make a note here. Quite glary. We got pretty good sunlight, some scattered clouds, but a lot of snow. So I'm just doing an untimed settle into my training horse stance. Of course, a training horse stance can be single weighted as well, and it can also be shift weighted, which I guess is just kind of my term to describe the idea that, you know, the aesthetic, the presumption, the default for any horse stance is center weighted, but it can certainly be center weighted with the trunk turn. It can be single weighted, as we discussed, I think specifically yesterday, I think it was, and today we did, maybe the last couple days in the warm-ups. It can be single weighted, it can be centrally weighted, which is what we see as our default, and it can be favoring one side to whatever extent, right? So I'm 50-50, now I'm, you know, 60-40, 70-30, 80-20, 90-10, and then 100 on one leg, right? So wherever you want to be is fine. Obviously, from a training point of view, it's nice to do the full on one leg and the full on the other, but certainly being used to them all is fine. And of course, I just invented those percentages. You know, you could do 72% here, and you know, that would be fine too. So there's our training horse stance. I guess I'll do it in profile. I'm feeling pretty good today. It's not too blustery, doesn't feel too cold. I feel like I'm dressed pretty well for it. I had pre-written some notes, so I don't feel like I'm behind the 8 ball. I already did 2 outdoor live streams today. I have a whole bunch of classes later tonight, but I think I'll be able to finish this and go inside and post it and cook some hearty food. And so anyway, just chatting. I'm feeling pretty good about it. I'm looking with my back to Sedona and looking through the Torrey of the Golden Gneiss here, just beyond the Great Birch, looking over towards the old ham and acid fire pit and the grieving tree and the cairn there. Looking at a new boulder we just placed a week or 2 ago for a seat by the berry patch and the bridge my students built over the vernal stream behind the Norway spruce. The bamboo green among the white snowscape here, the Scots pines, the old sweat lodge, the navel of Mother Earth. I could see the altar of the labyrinth with a snowdrift on it. Anyway, I'm just describing all the stuff you can't see, but quite often I do my lesson with all that in the background. So tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern, we do our Yichuan class, 11 a.m. Eastern, 30 minutes. It's free in person, although we get donations for you know, local charity, non-perishables and cash. And it's free to Patreon members. And it's just a small fee if you want to get the Zoom access to join in for a month or just a one-time. You just have to reach out and let me know. So there's my training horse stance. We'll do a little forward stance. I'll see if you have any other comments or questions. As I said, a little optimistic, but I notice even my coffee's still warm. So that's pretty good. All right, I don't see any other questions, so we're just gonna do a forward stance. We talked a couple different ones where I'm on a slack line and I'm on a board. Right now I'm on the slack line version. Very easy in a forward stance to have the pelvis, sort of the dorsal aspect of the pelvis to tip upward, or I guess we could think about the forward part of the pelvis to kind of tip down. So often I'll think of it as though the pelvis is a vessel, a bowl, and just trying to be aware, does that want to tip? Am I spilling the contents of that bowl? And often in I guess you can't see it with what I'm wearing, but often in a forward stance, there'll be this kind of a motion in the pelvis, you know, even if the back is straight. making you quite lordotic. I'm definitely packing this snow into ice, making my work that much harder. But it would be fun to have a fall here, so we haven't been able to do our Aikido class since, you know, the end of February or something like that, where we can interact physically and hug at the beginning of class and fall a whole lot. So I've been doing this sad solo falling practice, you know, just by myself, nobody throwing me, nobody helped me get up, no good reason to fall, just falling. Maybe I should film that sometime or live stream it. It's I'm sure it's very sad. So I'm just practicing the static here. I'll change. As we said, a lot of times people call this a 7-3 stance, sort of suggesting 70% of the weight forward. But as we talked about today, the weight can be all over the place in the front stance, but sort of the default aesthetic is going to be around here. Clouds are moving, it's really pretty. Quite the blue sky. I'll do the plank version here. I think while I do the plank, I'm going to do that isotonic, isometric version, which I think I'm not going to reteach here, but that may help with that mnemonic, as we mentioned when we taught the forward stance, which I feel was yesterday or recently. I don't remember. I think it might have been yesterday. I think we did the forward stance yesterday, and when the snow came, we were doing the training horse stance. As my plan was to do gongbu, and then it was a blizzard. Blizzard, or really difficult conditions, but particularly blizzard, always make me think training horse stance. I had a chance to train that way overseas, and so it's fond and horrifying memories that I have. So I called an audible and switched the announced gongbu training for, again, I'm keeping that isotonic here. I switched the announced gongbu training for training horse stance to match the weather and my pleasure. I'm feeling like I might have a little bit of time to write some poetry this afternoon. We shall see. We'll try the other side. That was a little bit longer doing the isotonic than, or perhaps isometric, than I think we did when we learned it. But I was daydreaming a little, kind of doing it the way I would normally do it for a little bit longer, maybe a little lower. So again, your ego's not invited to these free sessions. So if it has to come inside, just say, no thanks. Hey, Josh is here. I'm wearing the boots you gave me, sir. How about that? These are boots given to me by Josh. He literally was wearing them and he took them off on my driveway, unlaced them, told me they were mine. I stepped into them. A beautiful gift. And oddly, they fit. we can have the forward stance where I'm turned a little bit open. I'm going to just turn a bit here while I keep that isometric. That was a little ice calving off that you might have just heard there, sliding down the car hood. So I'm going to take a different forward stance now, the one where my feet are perpendicular. I'm going to just do a little bit longer one, the style that allows me to reach the coffee. You know, I definitely see people, their sense of the importance of pure stance training fades as they learn more and more complex, intricate, sophisticated, inner door, exciting, aesthetic techniques and moves and forms and weapons and all that. And I might say, but more often I'll think to myself, you know, when's the last time you just did stance practice? It's not as exciting as, you know, doing this with you know, the double bat left form or something like that. But this is what's important, you know. It may be that the only thing more important than stance training in martial arts is awareness training. Hey Steve, good to see you, sir. So I'm going to transition to that Troy Lei foot stance, the Dingji Ma. I didn't remember the term Ji yesterday, so we're going to practice Dingji Ma, which I rather like for qua training myself, stance training. I've done it for people specifically, you know, IT band issues and such. Although I think it's also going to get you in the psoas a little bit too. I think I might have to work my psoas a little bit and then try this and see if that's quite what it's hitting, but I think it is. I just don't particularly feel it myself. Dingji Ma, so the character for nail in Chinese, so this is the stance named after the character for nail, or referencing the character for nail, or seen to be looking like the character for nail, where we have this line in almost like a J, horizontal, vertical, and the vertical ends with that little ducktail hook. So I think my front foot is this direction, the line between my heels is here, and then my back foot has the little hook. I think that's the sort of understanding there. Very similar to when we talked about the bow and arrow, and we could sort of see the look of the two legs being bow and arrow like. There's the Dingy Ma, real challenge to be healthy with the knee on this one, so I wouldn't think it's a beginner stance, although I'm sure in Choi Foot it's a beginner stance, but I wouldn't think of it that way. This time I'll do it offset a little bit to this side. And I feel like that's it. I feel like we did cross stance, we did training horse stance, we're doing forward stance. I don't know if I probably didn't do every version of forward stance that I did in the lesson devoted to it, but I feel like we've gone through a couple versions here. Could be called a mountain climbing stance, a dancer stance, a lunging step, a lean forward stance, Dingy Ma, as we said, 7-3 stance, 70-30 stance, bow stance, bow and arrow stance, Gongba, Gongbu. But again, the idea is that I kind of have a narrowing of my stance, which allows me more reach and more defense of my center line. Often the consideration is about the groin, but the whole center line allows me to blade, and also allows me to drive both of my hips to the forward position, which for me is over here, as opposed to a stance that's similarly long and narrow, like so, that I really can't get this arm to reach, right? So now I can square my hips towards the direction of my attention. I almost said the direction of my front foot, but we were just doing Dingy Ma where it's sort of perpendicular to that. And also sometimes you'll see the stance done where my front foot's toed in a little bit, right? Like so, or even like so. Also forward stances, same ideas. I don't know if I taught that particular idea, but I guess now that I'm in it, so you're kind of train tracked on a narrow gauge train track and toe in the front foot. I've also seen this with this foot toed out a bit, maybe even like 45 and 30, not even parallel. Although I'm sure I've seen it parallel, that starts to feel more like a boxer stance. But I kind of like it when we square up that back foot and that foot's down. So maybe that's my last version. I'll just settle into this. I see your comments now, Josh. It's not that cold. I'm actually feeling okay. You know, this says live video interrupted. I wonder if that happened a while ago and I missed it. I don't know. Maybe I'm live, maybe not. But we'll finish with the leg circles. Same ones that we've been doing. Careful not to lean, careful not to lift the shoulders, hold the breath, careful not to tip to the outside, or either by shifting the knee or cantilevering and leaning. So the hip drives the circle the other way, knee drives the circle the other way, ankle drives the circle, and then changes the path of the circle. Same thing. I'm just doing this a little forward this time. I've always been doing them off to the side. And certainly if you need to touch down to stabilize, that's fine. But for some people this is going to be a very subtle difference. I'll do this to the rear as well. For some people it's going to be a very subtle difference when I catalyze the movement with the knee compared to the ankle, or the ankle compared to the hip. For other people it'll be quite obvious. But I'd like you to become aware of it one way or another, not because one is more important than the other, but that they're all different. And while it might be a subtle difference to sense, I think it's important to be able to tune into the body. So I think that's it. I think we have 3 days left where we'll just practice these themselves, and then I think I'm done. So thank you. I see Dennis is here. Thank you, sir.